I am here with Jennifer. So, Jennifer, when and where were you born?
I was actually born in Papillion, Nebraska by Omaha. So, but I've lived here in Hastings, Nebraska my entire life. So, born and raised here.
Okay. Much. How would you describe your childhood?
Interesting.
Okay.
And the only reason I say that is because I was a mixed child of a white single mother. So my childhood is going to be vastly different than most kids' childhood. Just different experiences and a different type of household and stuff like that. So, not good. I had a good childhood, but it's obviously going to be my experiences towards life and things are going to be a little bit more different than most. So yeah.
Gotcha. So how would you describe like Hastings, like growing up in Hastings?
Growing up in Hastings, I've been here for 43 years, so it's been, calm, pretty mellow. You never kind of perceive it to be the type of town that kind of stuff would happen. And so you hear stuff on the news and you're like, well, I'm safe because I'm here in Hastings, Nebraska. Nothing touches us here. Like, we have a little bit of Mayberry syndrome that kind of goes on. So you're just like, as long as I don't go outside to the crazy world, I'm okay. I'm safe here. But as you grow up, you also realize that, like, it's not where you live. It's the people and things like that. Just things tend to happen. Mentalities tend to change. And so you kind of go with the flow after a while too. But it's pretty much the same, from when I was being a little kid to now, my perception of it is pretty much still the same. Yeah. There's random and fluke, whether it's like crimes and violence and stuff, but right now, no place is safe. You're gonna have some form of darkness impede on your Mayberry at some point in time.
Right.
So you just, we are lucky enough to kind of keep our rose-colored glasses on a little bit longer than most do. So
I agree with that. So did you go to high school here in town, or?
I actually did. I went to high school here in town, and I actually went to the Catholic school here in town. So not only am I the only mixed child of a single white female, but I'm the only mixed child in a 99% Caucasian school system. Yeah.
Do you have a significant other?
I do. I have my husband. We've been married. This May will be 19 years, and we have 5 kids together.
Awesome. That's so cool. What was like your first interaction, or like how did you meet them?
I knew of my husband in high school, but we never really ran around in the same groups. And like I always tell my kids, because they want to hear this great romantic story, like we're high school sweethearts, and we always tell them, like, if we would have met in high school, you people never would have happened because you're different people at that point in time. So, I probably would have thought he was an asshole. He thought I was, a witch with a really strong broomstick. And so we met. We were probably prospectively 21, 22, and I happened to be out to the bar one night. Super romantic. Out to the bar one night with a friend of mine that he happened to know. And so we just got to conversating, and we just kind of met from there, and it's been history ever since. So
nice. So what is your current career path?
I'm gonna die behind my chair. That's my career path. I've been doing hair for 20 years, and I really don't see that changing anytime soon. I like what I do. Every day's different. You get to interact with people differently on each given day. So how'd it work out for you? Good. So really, I don't see my career path really changing anytime soon. The only thing I could really say maybe it changing is just potentially the hours that I work would maybe slow down just a smidge, just because my children are actually getting older and being able to spend that more time with them. I have a son that's graduating in May. He is also having a baby in May. So, now that puts me in a whole another category of life. Whether I want it to be or not. But, just realizing that I've spent majority of my time working so they could have things, it's now just a lot more important that I spend the quality time with them before they run away from me and never want to come home again. So.
All right, so we're going to kind of move on to your understanding experiences with street harassment.
Much better.
Yes.
No blonde. No blonde.
Very pretty. It looks much better.
It's me.
It's me.
I really like that.
It's very pretty.
Can you describe what street harassment is?
Here's the thing. To me, street harassment is your own perception. You know, I think in general, somebody, you're walking along the street, minding your own business, and somebody is impeding your space, whether it's physically or verbally, unwantingly. How you take that harassment determines on your own mindset. Yes, there's going to be people who are a lot more forceful and are going to be a lot more in your space, like I said, verbally or physically. And you may have to then make a judgment call on how you understand that. But when you're walking along and you're just in that moment, it's just in that moment. And how you let that moment affect you is completely on you. You know, I haven't potentially had a lot. Remember, I live in Mayberry, Nebraska. So I always see it as one of those things like, it may be a little catcalling, a little hooping, a little like, hey baby, like walking up next to you, but I'm walking along and I'm moving on. You gonna stay and do what you gonna do, I'm moving on. Right. And it's not going to affect my day because it's just not worth that time and energy. But I understand that in some areas that harassment's a lot more intense and a little bit harder to walk away from. So I can say that what I've experienced has been at the level that some other women have had experienced at.
Gotcha. So stopstreetharassment.org kind of has this like definition of street harassment. It's a working definition. And they say that it's gender-based street harassment that is unwanted comments, gestures, and actions forced on a stranger in a public place without their consent and is directed at them because of their actual or perceived sex, gender expression, or sexual orientation, and that it includes unwanted whistling, leering, sexist, homophobic, or transphobic slurs, persistent requests for someone's name, number, or destination after they've said no, sexual names, comments and demands, following, flashing, public masturbation, groping, sexual assault, and rape. So like, kind of how do you feel about that definition?
It's really damn long.
Yeah, I know.
And really, like, if you're gonna make that definition that long, that is a huge umbrella to put, like, what I perceive as, what my perception is a simple action. And like I said again, but my interaction has never been as intense as some other women has been. I've never had somebody follow me and just keep on me and on me, or physically grab me, you know, and impede my space to the point that I can't finish going where I'm going. You know, I understand the definition because you have to kind of like umbrella that. But you could also say the same thing about discrimination.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to yell out these things because I don't like the way you look, whatever that is. Your sex, your color, your orientation, what you're wearing, what you're not wearing. It's kind of in that same category. And in a society that we are more than welcome to say whatever we want at any point in time and not be corrected for it or not feel like we can counteract that thought at any moment, that's when it becomes a little leery. And it does become dangerous because people now feel like they can say these things with no repercussions. If you say something to me and I feel like it's a slam towards me and whatever derogatory statement it happens to be, we are in such a society that you cannot like turn around and have this, you know, well, I have my freedom. You should be able to say that. These are my thoughts.
Right.
Those are your thoughts. Keep them to yourself. That's your freedom. You know, but once again, you can't let somebody's ignorance or moment of stupidity control the way you think about yourself and perceive yourself in any manner at all.
Thank you.
Can you grab that for me?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's my thoughts on that definition.
Gotcha. So have you ever like responded to harassers?
You know, like we were talking earlier,
What time are you kind of thinking?
you know, as we were talking earlier about me having a childhood growing up, I've
let's
never
shoot
been
for
that girl that's
11:30.
been like, oh,
Okay,
she's
your
so
name?
pretty. Oh, like, so when people, men, particularly men, happen to say something, I'm like,
And then for a
oh, know this is not your response you were looking for, but that's kind of nice. Thank you. It makes my day.
You're welcome.
You put me in that category of whistling worthy, so thank
Right.
you. And I think your response dictates how much further that can go. And I think when people who are harassing another person on the street, you have to make that quick judgment of how you're going to handle it, because those situations can escalate quickly. I've always tend to use humor or the opposite of what the intended reaction is going to be to kind of cool down a situation. But I've been lucky in that I've been lucky in that aspect that I've been able to do that. And I think also because of my job, being behind the chair and being a hairdresser, part of my job is reading people and reading a situation. So I have a slight insight of like being able to read people and see things that aren't necessarily always that other observers may not know. So I have that advantage to me. But like I said, and honestly, I don't know how I'd respond to somebody who was very aggressive, because I've never had that happen to me. And it's just got to be ultimately overwhelming to be in your own zone and have somebody impede on that and restrict, physically restrict you or verbally restrict you or make you feel horrible about yourself. It's just got to be an overwhelming feeling and not everybody is quick-witted to think how to respond to that situation. All I say is I'm lucky to live in Mayberry.
Do you think street harassment should or should not be taken seriously?
Both. I think my perception of street harassment is that if you would have probably asked me 20 years ago, it's no big deal. Like, at some point in time, someone's going to say something and you're going to feel harassed. If people are going to say something, you just keep walking. There's enough people in the street, someone's going to always help you. That's not necessarily true 20 years now. Now people are a lot more aggressive. People have a lot more opinions, and they're verbal, and they're just these intentions to emotionally hurt somebody at some point in time. So yes, street harassment needs to be taken seriously, but I think every situation has to have its own criteria. You need to look at it and look at the situation and what was going on, what was said. But I also know that my perspective on situations is always going to be vastly different than somebody else's. And that if you are scared, if you feel fear in that situation has now been amped up into a whole nother level. And you do absolutely need to take it seriously. And I think if we don't take it seriously at this point in time, that line has already been crossed, and that line's going to continue to get crossed, and things are going to progressively get worse. Like I said, 20 years ago, it may have been a little verbal, a little, hey, baby, woohoo.
Yeah.
Now we're at a point where we have to put in groping, rape, physical restraint, being verbally assaulted. There's a reason why you have to put those things in that definition, because things have now crossed that next line. And I think if you don't take it seriously, then just things will progressively get worse. And then you have to look at the situation of, is it going to be safe for people to walk around? Are you going to have to put restrictions on, speech on public transport or on sidewalks? You have to have a space bubble because you can't touch anybody because you might offend somebody. You almost have to go back to the drawing board and say, look, people, everyone's got personal space. Mind your space. If the girl don't look like she want to talk to you, mind your business. But I'm also 43. I'm considered old school at this point in time. I don't know. But I know, like I said, because we live in Hastings, and we probably don't get it as much or as intense, but it is out there and it's very, very seriously. And there's women who walk around all the time scared to walk down the street by themselves, to walk down a campus by themselves. So you have to take it very seriously, just for for those women, not for the women who feel safe in Mayberry.
Right.
You have to take it very seriously.
So we'll kind of move on to like street harassment as a whole. Do you think street harassment is a form of gender inequality?
Yes and no, because I think, like, if you ask women in my, in my age group, I was in their 40s, but I think of, like, street harassment, I think of, like, men harassing women. That's not necessarily the truth anymore. You have women harassing men because they look good and, or they're whatever. You have women harassing transgender females because they consider them whatever. They don't agree with the lifestyle. You have men, in the same aspect. So you're crossing all lines and gender spectrums at this point in time. So, it's a confusing time we're in.
Agreed. What do you think, or like, what do you believe causes street harassment, or like, kind of why do you think sexually suggestive remarks are made towards people, especially if they're strangers?
Because I think it is that, because there's that instant, hey, she's cute, she's pretty, or I don't agree with that moment, and you feel like you are free to say whatever what you have to say in that moment because they're gonna be gone. It's in that moment. You can't touch me. There's no consequences for my actions. What are you gonna do? Come find me? Because I think, honestly, if you had somebody yelling at you continuously and you took control of the situation and you confronted that individual on a crowded street, they're going to back down. They're no worse than a bully in a schoolyard. You confront them, they're gonna back down because there's no power. The power they have is in their words and your fear. I totally forgot the question.
Like, what causes like street harassment? Like, why does someone do it?
Because they're morons. Really? I mean, it's one thing to watch somebody walk by, I don't care, male or female, and be like, ooh, they fine as hell. But once it comes beyond that, like, my small group of people or audible to everybody else,
yeah,
there has been a line across. And I think the other aspect of that is that we're now a society that is sexually a lot more open. You can't turn TV on without having some form of sexuality viewed on TV at all times. So if it's in your music, it's in your TV, everybody's it's out there. I think we as a society have not matured to the level. If you look at like Europe, like it's on, their sexuality is very open. It's been open for many years. But we're not as like, boobs. That we are still like teenage boys when it comes to this stuff. We're like, look at that. We just don't have the maturity. We don't know how to deal with it. We don't understand as a society that there's a time and the place for that. It's rude. You can think it, just don't act on it. Street harassment is the same thing as a lot of things. It's the same thing as racism. You can think it, just don't say it, because that now put you in a totally different category. And there's no consequences for those actions anymore. Nobody's standing up and saying, hey, leave him alone. Just shut up. There's none of that. So you have these rampant teenage ideas of sexuality out on the street, whether it's hot ladies, hot men, people who don't understand gender, transgender or anything of that sort. We're just kind of in a quandary, and people just don't know how to keep each other in check or just keep yourself in check. And I know that, like, I am really good friends with Brandy Weaver. She is a transgender female here in town. And I know that she's had some issues. I know that and I've seen it. I've seen, like, her driving or walking up, and, like, people were like, what? Like, because she is a very passable female. Until you're face to face. There's some obvious things that give her away that she was male beforehand. But, so, and now the transgender and gay and lesbian, the GLBT is so much more open, and that people feel like they can say anything. And I'm like, is wrong with you? Like, did your mama teach you no common sense? Like, if you don't agree with it, keep your mouth shut and you can walk out the door. Like, I'm just amazed at the fact that people think it's perfectly okay.
Right.
That's the part that just, I'm like, oh Lord. People are a hot mess these days.
Do you feel like there's a line where street harassment ends and sexual harassment begins?
It's a blurry line. It's a very blurry line. Because each individual person involved in that situation is going to have a different perception of that situation. And somewhere in the middle, there's the actual truth. You know, the target of the harassment's always going to, there's going to be an amped up emotional feeling to that. And so that you had fear and, you know, frustration and lack of control in a situation. And then if there's any, like, physical boundaries that have been crossed, then there's gonna be, they're gonna feel not just street harassment, they're gonna feel harassment, physical harassment. So there is some blurry lines, and I think going back to your question earlier, you know, should it be taken seriously? Absolutely, because that's already a blurry line, and if you don't clear that line up real quick, there's gonna be no line in between either one. Okay. And we, in a society that aren't keeping each other in check anymore, are going to be the society that walks by while shit is happening. You know, people come here because they're this great nation, but we are not a nation anymore that keeps each other in check. Mm-hmm. You know, so absolutely, it's a very blurry line, and it's a scary time in that situation because you can't always count on your fellow individual on the street or on the bus, transit, or wherever you're at to have your back anymore. Mm-hmm. When you're more, and you watch social media and you're more amazed at people coming at each other's rescue for stuff, like, oh my God, those people really exist and that's amazing, that should not be our reaction.
Right.
That should be like, that's the way things should happen. You know, but unfortunately it is not. So I think there needs to be a group, organization, a definition of that line that lets people know that A, it's not a right, and that line is blurry. Do not cross it at any. And there's repercussions for this action. Also, that's the other thing. There's absolute repercussions for your actions and your words. Because let's face it, anymore, words hurt more than anything physically you can do to anybody. Because mm-hmm. those are the scars that last forever. And anybody who's ever been harassed, bullied, demeaned in any way knows that words will cut deeper than anything physically you can ever do to somebody, because those are the scars that last forever, and the victim is always the one who's left with the scars, not the aggressor. Absolutely.
Do you know of any initiatives that have been taken to make people more aware of street harassment?
You know, unfortunately, I do not. I know with Laura, she has a very strong passion about street harassment, which, coming from Hastings, Nebraska, to me has always been slightly confusing, but she comes from she's older than I am, she comes from a different place, a different time, and she sees it differently, and she sees the importance of it. And she's really kind of my front line of knowledge on that. I think because I'm curious of why she thinks it's so, like, necessary, and I'm thinking, you live in Hastings, Nebraska, really? But that also goes in that whole mentality of not helping out your fellow neighbor. Why don't I ask instead of, like, what can I do? How do you get more information out there? It's more comes from a, like, what? I don't understand. You live in Hastings.
Right.
Why should this be your problem, lady? You know, when the fact is that it is everybody's problem, because we should be everybody's neighbors, and we should be aware, whether you live in Hastings, you live in Chicago, you live down in Atlanta, you live in California, wherever, you should ultimately be aware. And if you have experience or have somebody who does experience, to be able to pass on knowledge how to handle it and deal with it, or be aware of groups that are dealing with it.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to Jeff's hair and I'll be back. Do you need anything?
Nope, I'm good. Okay. Thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Laura Logan's awesome.
Thank you.
No, I hope that answered most of your questions. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I've lived here my entire life, so my experience to the whole scenario is like, huh?
Right.
I go to Omaha, I'm like, oh, baby, thank you. You're so sweet. You have no idea. You make my day. So, but I know I've known Laura for a couple years now, and I know that it is very much of a passion for hers to spread the awareness of it. And, you know, I think even in the smaller communities, because it does happen. And I think it's one of those things that just because I don't see it and don't experience it doesn't mean it does not happen.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't necessarily, you know, those people who may not, that's the other thing. It may happen, people just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's the other part of it. It's no different than rape. People just, you can't do anything about it until somebody talks about it sometimes too. So education is the key.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.